the way we celebrate Christmas changed? Or have I just gotten older? Now, I remember a mixture of excitement, of crazy busyness, lists of things to do and buy, and events to attend, and hosts. I remember a conflict, lots of conflicts, of scheduling between preparations and the executions, and the secular and the sacred, and the office and the family. Each area demanding large amounts of extra time and care. And out in the world, the messages of popular songs were about love, which is good, but it was often romantic love or family love. I will be home for Christmas. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. It'll be a blue Christmas without you. And it tended to make us more nostalgic and tearful than joyful as we scurried around desperately trying to recreate for ourselves a past that was gone. Or for some of us, create a past that really never had been. We worshiped, I remember, at the altar of traditions that had been handed down to us, or that we had established ourselves so that our Christmas, I love that phrase, we're doing our Christmas today. Our family's going to have our Christmas. I never get that. When is Christmas, my friends? When is it? December 25th. Would you say that with me? Christmas is December 25th. And on December 25th, it's the birth of Christ. That's Christmas. Whatever you go and do with your family is your family gathering. That is not, I'm sorry to be ugly here, that is not your Christmas. Like it's your personal thing that you do. It is just a day that you do with your family where you go and exchange gifts and have a lovely meal. Call it something else. Christmas is the birth of Christ. Unless, of course, as I said before, on that day you go and part of what you do is you sing hymns and say prayers and worship Christ. And thank God for the gift of Jesus. Maybe you do. I shouldn't judge. But I bet you don't. I bet you don't. So it's a lovely thing. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I just love it when people say, oh, we're having our Christmas. Okay, I know. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. Barbara. Thank you. I got it. So, our Christmas should be warm and wonderful. We try so hard to make it. And we used to look for that Christmas miracle. That solution to the problem that plagued us, or the restoration of a lost relationship. A Christmas miracle. I think Hollywood made that up. Bing Crosby. We love those movies. But at the end of it all, so many of us found ourselves exhausted. Absolutely exhausted. And there was soft grumbling of the quietly truthful that what was left after we all came to our senses was a living room full of dried pine needles stuck in the carpeting, trash cans full of crumpled papers and bows, and the receipts, or worse, the bills, to show for it. So, is it still that way? Is it? Or have I just gotten older and dropped out of the race? I used to be in it, big time. Along the way, though, every year, every single year, I would question, so what is this thing called Christmas? Is it this, or is it something else? Well, over these last few weeks of Advent, we have been singing and reflecting on this beautiful Advent hymn, O Come, Emmanuel. And the first week, we reflected on being in exile. Last week, we considered wisdom. This week, the hymn takes us to the deserts of Sinai, where the people of Israel have been led by the prophet Moses. Now, I know many of you know this really well, but I also know that you might not. So let me just really quickly, and I'll do this fast, faster than I did the other thing, I promise. Let me remind you quickly of how Israel got to Egypt. Do you remember that Jacob had 12 sons? Okay. And his favorite was Joseph, the dreamer and the interpreter of dreams. We shouldn't have favorites, but Jacob had one. And Joseph's 11 jealous brothers beat him up and sold him into slavery to some people who took him to Egypt. There's the first thing. But what people mean for harm, God intends for good. That happens to be Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. You want to look that scripture up. Joseph thrives in Egypt. He rises to the top. He makes it to the big time. And when he becomes a young man, he is right up there with the Pharaoh. And Joseph tells the Pharaoh that there will be a terrible drought, and to prepare for it, to plant and store grain and food and keep the water for hard times to come. The Pharaoh is wise and listens, so that when the hard times come, Egypt, unlike all of the surrounding Middle East, prospers. Jacob and his 11 sons, however, do not. They suffer from the drought, and eventually, on the edge of starvation, they go to Egypt and they ask Joseph for forgiveness for what they did to him years before. And they ask for assistance. Joseph does forgive him. And all 12 brothers live together in Egypt. The 12 tribes of Israel stem from those 12 brothers. Generations later, the Israelite people have multiplied. They have turned into a huge number of people of this nation living inside Egypt. And the new Pharaoh, a couple generations down, is worried about their strength and their number. He decides they are a threat. You've never heard of that kind of thing, have you? So he subjugates them, and he turns them into slaves, and makes a plan to kill the male babies born to them as a way of cutting back on their fertility. The people cry out to Yahweh, and in answer to their cries, God calls a deliverer, Moses, to come and lead them out to their own land, to the promised land, the land of because God is a God of justice. Make no mistake. Make no mistake. However we see things unfold in real time, as we look back through history and back through time, justice always, ultimately prevails. Evil does not. Power misused for greed and injustice does not succeed. So the people go to the Sinai desert with Moses, and Moses goes up onto the mountain. Now, we know that Moses has gone up to be with God to receive the commandments which will endure for all time. But down at the foot of the mountain, the people wait. And it doesn't take long for them to feel tired, exhausted, really, exhausted, confused, lost, desperate, and most of all without Moses telling them what God intends for them, they feel abandoned. They feel as though they need to do something to help themselves. And isn't that just like us? Isn't that just what we human beings do? Don't just stand there, do something. It doesn't matter if there's nothing in particular helpful or constructive to do or say. Sometimes, if we are anxious enough, we just do anything. Busy, busy, busy. So they take all the gold they have, earrings, jewelry, everything, and they melt it. And they made a golden calf. Now, I'm going to tell you something. It's not really as bad as it sounds. I know it sounds awful. But remember, later on, when they have the tablets and they have the Ark of the Covenant, they don't have it yet, but they will. They have the Ark of the Covenant, and if you remember how it looks, do you remember that it has on it bull's horns? All of the symbolism and all of that, and where it all comes from now. But the Ark of the Covenant actually has bull's horns on it. So the whole idea of the bull and all of that, it's not really as bad as it sounds. I know it sounds as though they're reconstructing an Egyptian god and all of that. It's not as bad as it sounds. But they are still creating something tangible that they can see and touch. And more important, something that they have control over. Something that they themselves created. That's what an idol is. An idol is not necessarily something satanic or evil. But, an idol is a strange thing, really, when you think about it. It's something that we need. Oh, we need it, and we want it. But it's something that we create. We do it. And in a strange way, we feel like we have power over it. We just want it to plug us into some other power, but boy, we want to be able to manipulate the power. Do you see what I'm saying? And we want to do that with God. Some people do it with a spouse. I'll let that sink in. They'll say, I adore worship. I adore my husband or my wife. Of course, theologically, I have a problem with that statement just right the way it is. But in fact, if it were even true. But then And they go on to say something that indicates how well they've trained that spouse. Or how well they've improved some aspect of that spouse over time. It's not adoration. And we do it with God. We like to create God or Yahweh in our own image. We love that. We don't realize we're doing it when we do it, but we do it all the time. If we think or feel a certain way about things, anything, then surely God must too. Right? Because we're good people. Right? And since we're good people, then God must have the same opinion we do. Now, we don't think of that as creating God in our own image, but don't you see that's all backwards? We're supposed to be figuring out who God is and matching God, not, this is who I am, God, you match me. But we do it, and then we're so upset with God when God doesn't act that way. Well, I don't understand why God doesn't do something like I would if I were God. I hear this all the time, and I keep, trying to ever so gently and pastorally guide people into that conversation. And if we want a certain thing to happen, and for it to happen in a certain way, and in a certain time frame, don't we? You would like something to happen, and I'd like for it to happen now, and I'd like to happen this way. Well, what happens when God doesn't make it happen that way? When? Well, if God doesn't align with our characteristics or our requests or our time frame, well then sometimes, just sometimes, we question God's power. Well, I guess then God isn't as powerful as I thought God was. Or God doesn't love us as much as I thought He does. Like those first people of God in the Sinai desert, we are often guilty of making idols. We take Advent, a time we might use for peace and for reflection, for people and joy. And we use it to create a myriad of golden, who knows what. And we use them for ourselves, to bring ourselves comfort, to keep the gloom and doubt away. Jim, I wrote something on your paper. What did I write?
When we are exhausted?
When we are exhausted, when we are confused, especially when we're lost or desperate, and certainly when we feel abandoned. Those are the times, just like those people on Sinai, when we are most prone to create some sort of an idol. And you know all the most dangerous times, the worst times. For some, of course, it could be alcohol, addictions of all sorts, spending too much money, gambling. It could be any of those most extreme things that overtake us, particularly this time of year. But it could be smaller things that you don't even realize, that erupt in anything that is an obstacle to peace and to love and to anything else. And worse, we take our wonderful, loving, living God, forgetting the many times we have been blessed, the many ways we have been gifted, and will be gifted in the future. and we attempt to reshape God into an idol that we can manipulate and control. So let us try rather to throw away all of these false things in our lives. Finally, brothers and sisters, think on these things. Whatever is true, whatever is honest, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is good, if there is anything worthy of praise, Scripture says, think of these things. Hold these things in front of us. And adore, worship only God. So our question for today is, what idols have you created, even inadvertently, that make you forget or lose sight of the nature and work of God in your life? And what steps can you take to remove those idols and offer God your full surrender? As Christy plays through O Come, Emmanuel one last time this Advent season, let's just reflect on those two questions one more time, and then we'll pray. Generous God, we thank you for all you have blessed us with. We thank you for understanding who we are as human beings, and that you continually forgive us and give us more chances. Be with us as we finish this season where we reflect and prepare us for this new Jerusalem that comes. All of these things we pray